If you ache for truth, goodness, and beauty, if you're hungry for a Christianity with substance and strength, if you long for a faith that's big and bold and biblical and all about Jesus Christ, if you're inspired by the idea of one church that has spanned 20 centuries, 24 time zones, and 2 hemispheres, enfolding every race, nation, and language, then you're considering Catholicism. We tend to think of time in a linear fashion, progressing from A to B to C to D to Z or whatever, and beyond that. And we think of it in terms of events. So we mark the date of our birth, graduating from high school, when we get married, or graduate from college, whatever, when we get to retire. We define it that way, and we have a sense of seasonality, right? Christmas comes around every year, summer, 4th of July, tax day. We have some sense of seasons and cyclicalness, but our understanding of the calendar is largely defined by events and tasks. So we look at deadlines and vacations and new jobs and old jobs, right? I mean, that's kind of how we just think of time. And again, we've become fairly disconnected from the cycle of seasons in a modern world where we're surrounded by technology. But if we really live into the Christian vision of time, what we see is a grand unfolding and cyclic story that revolves around the heart of Christ's life, death, and resurrection. It is a rhythm that sanctifies time itself, and it marks every week, every season. It's a chance to live into the greatest drama in history. And that's the Catholic liturgical calendar. It's not just how the church keeps track of holidays, so Christmas and Easter, whatever. The liturgical calendar is how the church breathes, how she prays, how she draws all of us, wherever we are in the world, into the one Paschal Mystery, which is, the Paschal means the Easter. So, Paschal Lamb, right? The Easter Lamb, the Easter Mystery. Now, welcome back to our series on OCIA. We're calling it OCIA, the Bridge to Rome. And we did a whole bunch of these episodes in the fall. I don't know when you're listening to this, but we're now kind of getting to the second half of the series. And in all of these episodes, I've been giving a disclaimer, which is that this series of episodes in no way, shape, or form should or is intended to or can replace the curriculum that your OCIA leader is laying out for you. You need to work the program. But my hope is that these OCIA episodes give those who are considering Catholicism a little bit of a preview of what kinds of things you'll cover in OCIA, what those topics might be. My hope is that for those of you who are in OCIA, while you're listening to these, they might be something of a supplement, a little boost to what you're learning in your classes. And for those of you who have been Catholic for some time, maybe cradle Catholics or you converted many, many years ago, I hope that this is something of a refresher course in the basics of the Catholic faith and maybe equips you a little bit to explain or share it a bit with others. So today we're talking about the liturgical calendar. Now, it just so happens that I'm recording this during Advent, which is one of the liturgical seasons. And so we have certain traditions that you're probably all familiar with. We light candles during Advent candles on a wreath. There's this sense of marching towards Christmas, that mix of penitence and excitement for what's coming. Advent is the start of the whole thing. It's the start of the liturgical year. It's the church's new year. So the Gregorian calendar, which I've talked about on this show, the year starts on January 1, but the liturgical calendar starts with the first Sunday of Advent. And so for those of you who are in OCIA or thinking about jumping into it, this calendar really will define the OCIA experience because it culminates at the Easter Vigil and Easter. And for folks who are in OCIA or thinking about jumping in, this calendar is kind of the backbone of what you'll experience because your classes might follow it loosely. They'll build towards Easter baptisms. But living the liturgical calendar, that's where the Catholic faith really comes alive. So let's unpack this. The Catechism puts it beautifully. It says, Holy Mother Church believes that she should celebrate the saving work of her divine spouse throughout the course of the year. That's from paragraph 1163. So it's all about making present the mysteries of Christ in our time and in our space. From his incarnation to his ascension, even looking ahead to his return. So the liturgical year isn't a linear straight line like our secular calendar. So ticking off January to December with our resolutions and our tax seasons and all that. No, the liturgical calendar is cyclic. It's represented as a circle. So it repeats every year. But it's always fresh because it's tied to the eternal now, the eternal present of God's salvation in Christ. Right? I mean, we've talked before on the show about how, when John in Revelation chapters 5 and 6 is taken into the throne room of God, he sees the lamb that was slain on the altar. And there is this sense of the eternal now, the eternal present of heaven. And the liturgical calendar keeps us sort of orbiting around that. I mean, think of it like this. The secular world marks time by productivity or seasons changing, right? So we think about the school year, we think about our work calendars, we think about projects, and we are aware that it's summer or it's getting cold, it's time to shovel the driveway because it's winter, right? But the church sanctifies time. It makes time holy. So every day, every season, in some way is pointing back to Christ. And the liturgical calendar is universal. So we've got 20 centuries, 24 time zones, 2 hemispheres, 1 church. Whether you're in Texas or Tokyo, we're all living through the same liturgical calendar. We're all on the same page of that calendar, all on the same day of that calendar, all living into the same week of that calendar, all, again, orbiting around the life of Christ. Now, at its core, the liturgical calendar has 2 big cycles that are woven together. So there is the temporal cycle. Temporal means related to time. So you have the big seasons that are focused on Christ's life. And you have the sanctoral cycle related to the saints. So like you have the feasts of Mary and the saints that pop up like highlights along the way. So again, think of this as like these 2 circles that are, it's not like a Venn diagram. They're actually one on top of each other. So at the same time, we're living through the seasons of Christ's life. So Advent, the season of his coming, Lent, marching towards Easter, right? Ordinary time, Eastertide, all of these things related to the life of Christ. We also are looking at the saints' days and the feast days, remembering the saints, because those come around throughout the year. So you can be in Advent, you can be in Lent, you can be in Eastertide, you can be in ordinary time, and you still have the feast of Saint so-and-so that pops up throughout that. So again, you've got like the temporal cycle, the life of Christ, and you've got the sanctoral cycle, the feast days of the saints. And these 2 things are laid on top of each other. And they define the colors that you see at Mass. So when you come to Mass, you'll notice that certainly the vestments of the priest and certain decorations in the church are going to be tied to the colors of the liturgical season. It's not just aesthetics. It's not just to be pretty. Those colors indicate what season we're in or what part of the sanctoral cycle we're in. So purple is for preparation and penance. So you have purple during Advent and Lent. White indicates joy and glory. So when you look at certain solemnity days, they're in white. You have green for growing through ordinary time. You have red that indicates either the death of martyrs or the Holy Spirit at Pentecost. So the colors signal the mood, the theme that we're at that point in the liturgical calendar. Now, the liturgical calendar is built around Sundays, first and foremost, because that's the Lord's Day. It's really a celebration of Easter every week. Every 7 days is a sort of little Easter. And then you have the big movable feasts that hinge on Easter, and Easter, by the way, the date shifts every year because it's tied to the lunar calendar, just like the Jewish Passover it fulfills. So this gets a little complicated. People always wonder, why does the date of Easter change? And I don't want to get into the formula right here, but it's tied to the Jewish Passover, or like the Jewish Passover, it's tied to lunar cycles. And those lunar cycles shift from year to year to year. And so the date of Easter, some years it's late in March and some years it's late in April. But you do also have fixed dates throughout the liturgical calendar. So like the Feast of the Nativity, Christmas Day, stays put on December 25. I did an episode recently about the Gregorian calendar. You get into this whole thing about the date of Easter. It goes back to the Council of Nicaea in 325. Basically, the formula for Easter is it's the first Sunday after the first full moon after the spring equinox. You got that? So you take the spring equinox, the date where the daytime and the nighttime is equal, and then the first full moon after that, the next Sunday is Easter, and that floats from year to year, and that's why the date of Easter floats. And what's interesting, I think, about that, we're so disconnected from those things because we live in this technological bubble, right? We live in our houses with electric lights surrounded by screens and computers, and we drive in cars, and we have street lights and everything else. So we're not really aware of things like lunar cycles and even equinoxes. Those don't really crack our day-to-day consciousness. But what I love about that is that it is rooted in the rhythms that God set to the creation. When God in Genesis 1 creates the heavens and the earth and the lights, the lights in the heavens and the cycles of creation, that the liturgical calendar, cycling around Easter, is tied to the rhythms of creation. And I think that grounds us, where we need to be grounded. So that's the framework, the skeleton that holds it all together. I literally could not do this without you, because this show is 100% listener supported. There are no ads, no sponsors. So if the episodes are helping you to understand the faith, to answer your questions, or draw you closer to historic Catholic Christianity, would you consider becoming a patron? For as little as $5 a month, you'll get every regular episode organized into topical playlists, plus exclusive bonus content, extra conversations, video Q&As, deep dives, live streams, behind the scenes, and more. Just head to patreon.com/considering Catholicism or tap the link in the show notes. Together, we're educating, equipping, and exciting people about the beauty of the Catholic faith. All right, now let's walk through the liturgical year itself, season by season, like we're flipping through the church's family album, sort of recalling all of the great experiences of the church. So it all kicks off with Advent. So that Advent is simply comes from Latin word for coming, or arriving. And so it is when the liturgical year begins with the first Sunday of Advent. That means now we are anticipating the first coming, the first arrival of Christ at the Nativity, 4 weeks later. So we have 4 weeks of Advent that lead up to the Nativity. And during that time of anticipation and penitence as we wait for Christ to come, the liturgical color is purple. So you're going to see the priest's vestments are purple. The wreath with its candles are going to be tied to purple. And again, this isn't just pre-Christmas hype. It's really time of preparing for both of the comings of Christ. So his birth in Bethlehem and his return in glory. So we have a first Advent and a second Advent, a new Advent. And the readings during Advent, or the Mass readings, are going to focus on the prophets and their proclamation, anticipation, foretelling of the coming of Christ. The readings are going to focus on John the Baptist and on Mary. So for someone who's in OCIA, this season is kind of mirroring your own journey, isn't it? That hopeful anticipation, getting ready for something life-changing that's coming. And then boom, we get to Christmas, the Feast of the Nativity on December 25, which is a solemnity, a most holy day on the liturgical calendar, a solemn day. And all of a sudden, the color changes from purple and explodes to white and gold. So you'll see the priest wearing white and gold vestments. You'll see the decor in the church will change. Because on that solemnity, we celebrate, I want to say we celebrate the incarnation, but that's not exactly right, because I did an episode recently where I pointed out that the incarnation, we actually celebrate when it happened at the Annunciation, but we celebrate the nativity, the birth of Christ, Christ coming into the world through his birth. The Word has been made flesh, actually made, as I said, it was made flesh at the Annunciation. It is conception, but he comes into the world at the nativity, visibly. So Christmas time runs through the baptism of the Lord in early January. So anyway, Christmas time or Christmastide, the time where we're sort of basking in the afterglow of Christmas, of the Nativity, runs from Christmas Day through the baptism of the Lord in early January. And during that time, we have feasts like the Holy Feast of the Holy Family, Feast of Mary, the Mother of God on January 1, the Feast of Epiphany. And all of this is a time of pure joy because the light is breaking into the darkness. And after Christmas time or Christmastide ends, we dip into something called ordinary time. And I think ordinary time, the term can be, I don't say misleading. In some ways, it's kind of a double entendre, a double meaning. Because when we hear the word ordinary, we think like ordinary, like common, normal, default. That's our understanding. But in Latin, the word ordo is where we get order, like things being in a certain order or ordinal numbers. So it means counting. And so in ordinary time, we are now counting the weeks. We are now moving through the liturgical calendar. So we have in the first week of ordinary time, the second Sunday of ordinary time, the third Sunday or third week of ordinary time. It's ordered time. And during ordered time, the liturgical color, the vestments are green because we grow. It's a time of growth through the order of time, through ordered time. And this first chunk of ordinary time right after Advent is pretty short, just a few weeks. So it's a few weeks of ordinary time where we focus on the early ministry of Jesus in the readings. So the readings of the Gospels will walk us through some of his teachings and his first miracles. But then Lent crashes in shortly after that, after a few weeks. So Lent is the 40 days leading up to Christ's passion, his death, and ultimately his resurrection. And those 40 days, you're going to notice that number 40, like the 40 days that it rained for Noah or whatnot, or the 40 years that the Israelites wandered to the wilderness. It's a biblical number. But those 40 days mirror Christ's particular fast in the desert. So after his baptism, Jesus went into the desert to be tempted, fast and be tempted by Satan for 40 days. And it's a time of preparation for his ministry. And so Lent is a time of us preparing, us walking toward Christ's suffering and death and resurrection. And Lent kicks off with Ash Wednesday. And that's when, we get the ashes on our forehead and we're reminded that from dust we came and to dust we will return. And so Lent is a time of penitence and reflection on our lives and the context of our lives before God. So again, the color here is purple because, again, it's a time of preparation and penance and fasting and almsgiving. And so Lent is intense, but it's purposeful. It's in a way stripping away to make room for grace. And that's where you get the whole tradition of, or what are you giving up for Lent? You know, Ed the Protestant on the show has talked about how the time he decided to give up Diet Coke for Lent and forced himself to drink Diet Pepsi during Lent, which felt like a suffering for him when he was a Protestant. But, right, the reason we give something up for Lent is that we are purposefully stripping away things in our life. That's the fasting part of it, to make more room for God. And the last 2 weeks of Lent is called Passiontide. Okay, the time of passion, as we're now leading into the last days of Jesus' earthly ministry, when he would suffer, his trial and his suffering and his passion. And so there's a couple things that happen in those last 2 weeks of Lent, which is things like the images in the church, statues, are veiled. So you'll notice that draperies are put over them, because we're building tension towards the cross as we move towards it. And the heart of all of this is the sacred Triduum, which is the 3 days right before Easter: Holy Thursday, Good Friday, and Holy Saturday. That's Latin for 3 days, right? Triduum. And they're not just 3 days, they are 3 days, but they're sort of one continuous celebration, 72 hours of focusing on the Paschal Easter mystery. So on Thursday was the day of Holy Week when the Last Supper occurred and Christ instituted the Eucharist and the priesthood. And then after that Last Supper, that night, he went out to the Garden of Gethsemane and he was arrested that night and put on trial. So Friday is the day of his passion, the day of his trial and his torture and his march to the cross, and then his crucifixion and death. So Good Friday is the day we celebrate the good passion, the goodness of his passion and death, which frees us, right? And we venerate the cross on Good Friday. So there'll be a Good Friday service. And one of the things you're going to do during the Good Friday service is you're going to come down and venerate the cross. And then we have the vigil on Saturday night, the Easter Vigil. And this is really, in the Catholic liturgical year, this is the mother of all liturgies. Okay, this is the Super Bowl of Catholic liturgy. It is fire and candles, baptisms, if you're in OCIA that year. That's when many will enter the church in full initiation. It's a long Mass, several hours, but this is the holiest night of the year. And then we wake up the next morning with Easter Sunday, and it's a resurrection joy. And then we have something called the Easter season, Eastertide, Easter time, which is the 50 days that follow Easter. And so the Easter season color is white because we're celebrating its joy. Christ is risen. And then we get to Ascension and then Pentecost. By the way, Pentecost in Scripture, the Pentecost was a Jewish feast, and it comes from the Greek words penta, which means 5 or 50, pentagon. But then you have cost with day, so 50 days. It was 50 days after Passover. So Pentecost is 50 days after Easter. And that kind of closes this Easter time, and the liturgical color is red because of the fire of the Holy Spirit coming down. And, you know, Easter time being 50 days is longer than Lent being 40 days. And think about that, because joy should be bigger than sorrow. So we have 40 days of penitential preparation for 50 days of celebration. See how that works? Isn't that cool? And then we go back to ordinary time. So this is that long green stretch in the liturgical year where the priest is wearing green. We're counting the weeks, whatever week of ordinary time, next week of ordinary time, that runs through summer and fall. But again, it's not ordinary like boring ordinary. It's ordinary as in ordered. It's numbered weeks of discipleship. And it's sprinkled with all kinds of feasts. So you've got Trinity Sunday right after Pentecost. You've got the Feast of Corpus Christi, the Feast of the Sacred Heart. And then big ones like the Assumption of Mary on August 15, All Saints on November 1, the Feast of Christ the King, which wraps it up. That's the end of ordinary time. And then scattered through all of that, we have saints' days, which will add color, right? So you have St. Joseph, St. Patrick, if it's your parish patron, local flavors, but the core is always Christ-centered. And then we celebrate these heroes of the faith, the saints. So practically, how does all of this play out? Well, for OCIA folks, many programs start in fall, and they align with that teaching vibe of ordinary time, and they ramp up through Advent and Christmas, and then they hit Lent hard with the scrutinies and then Easter initiation. So it's no accident that your personal bridge to Rome in OCIA follows the church's ancient liturgical calendar. And here's what gets me about that. In a world that sort of rushes from one thing to the next, the liturgical calendar kind of reframes time. And it really is countercultural because it slows us down in Advent when everyone's amping up their partying, going out during, run up to Christmas with Christmas parties and activities and all the shopping and, all that chaos is really a time that should be slowing us down if we're living Advent, if we're really living the liturgical calendar. And then Easter is amping us up. Easter time, when secular stuff is kind of fading because you get into the spring and then it's like school's out for the summer and people are checking out in a lot of different ways, spring break, summer, when we're actually amping up in the liturgical calendar, celebrate the risen Christ. So for those who are Protestants, you might have Christmas and Easter celebrations that are really strong, but most Protestant traditions don't have this full rhythm. A few Protestants do, Anglicans and Lutherans, like liturgical Lutherans, but generally, most evangelicals don't sort of live this rhythm, this immersive liturgical rhythm that takes you deeper into the divine mysteries. So look, if you're listening and you're curious, try it. Pick a feast day that's coming up on the liturgical calendar. Go to Mass. Notice the colors that are tied to that particular Sunday. Notice the prayers and the readings and how they tie into the liturgical calendar. And every year I tell myself, and I struggle with this. I'll be honest with you. I struggle with this because I'm a modern person, even though I do this. I work in the church for my job, but I still struggle against the cultural current. I want to live my life around the liturgical calendar. I want to live into the liturgical seasons, but so often the secular cultural world runs counter to that. And so it is a struggle, but one that we can make choices on, and we can try to deliberately find ways to more and more and more allow the liturgical calendar to frame our mental and emotional calendar and the cycles of our own lives. Okay? And this isn't about rules. I can already anticipate somebody evangelical out there going, oh, this is Catholics with all of their rules and all of that. It's really about relationship. It's really about living with Christ through time. It's really about allowing the light of eternity to shape how we go through our lives. So start paying more attention when you go to Mass to the colors and the readings and, the missal and where we are in the liturgical year, because it will take you further up and further in. And while you do, keep considering Catholicism. We'll be back with another episode very soon. And this show is 100% listener supported. My patrons keep the lights on, and they let me spend more time researching and recording so that these episodes keep coming. If this show has helped you, would you consider becoming a patron? For as little as $5 a month, you'll get every regular episode organized into topical playlists, plus exclusive bonus content, extra video Q&As, deep dive courses, live streams, and more. Just head to patreon.com/considering Catholicism or tap the link in the show notes. And would you please rate the podcast on whatever platform you're using and write a review on Apple Podcasts or on consideringcatholicism.com. And you can drop me a line. Patrons can comment directly on Patreon posts or Spotify. I read every one. Or you can always use the contact form at consideringcatholicism.com, or you can email me at consideringcatholicism@gmail.com. I love hearing your questions, your comments, and your stories.